Okay, here we are off to the races one more time. Today, Islamic empires. Basically, during the same time period, we've looked at Africa, uh, the Americas, East Asia, etc. The early modern period, 1500 to 1800. Then we'll go back a little bit before that to see the beginnings of these long-lived empires. Three of them in question, and this made up the bulk of the Islamic world at the time, though not all of it completely. But from left to right, west to east on the map, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire. Though they were united in religion, they certainly weren't united politically, and sometimes even went to war with each other. We'll see one famous example of this. So we'll begin with Professor Bentley, our lovable textbook author. Three empires divided up the greater part of the Islamic world. The Ottoman, which was distinguished by its multi-ethnic character, the Safavid of Persia, which served as the center of Shiite Islam, and the Mongol, which had been imposed over a predominantly Hindu Indian subcontinent. So Islamic rulers ruling over a primarily Hindu region of the world. So some interesting developments there, as we'll see. The creation of these durable and powerful political entities brought to an end a century and a half of Muslim political disunity, which means there had been smaller chunks of political entities and not three big empires. Of course, this still isn't a unified Islamic world because there's not one empire, there are three Islamic empires, but the quote here tells us that before this it had been splintered even more. So first, the Ottoman Empire. We'll take these in the order that we've already laid them out from a really good, fairly recent book on the Ottoman Empire. Appropriate, don't you think? The author says or asks, why did the family of Osman, the Ottoman Empire takes its name from its founder, come to dominate its neighbors and in Turkey? And over the succeeding centuries, how did the Ottoman Emirate, only one among many in the borderlands between Seljuk and Ilkhanid territory, become the sole inheritor of both these states and develop into a great and long-lived empire expanding into three continents? Was the Ottoman Emirate motivated above all by commitment to holy war, jihad, the struggle against non-Muslims that was a canonical obligation upon all believers? For Muslims, the world was notionally divided into the abode of Islam, the home of Islam, where Islam prevailed, and the abode of war, the infidel lands that must one day accept Islam, and holy war was the means to bring this about. So religion in these Islamic empires does play a large role, as we'll see, and we're seeing already here. Osman Bey, the founder of this dynasty, was really just a chieftain, kind of on the steppes of Turkey, one of many kind of local rulers, and he rose sort of higher and higher and higher, distinguished himself as a leader and a warrior, and a leader of large numbers of people. Around 1300, his particular state sort of to start to make waves in Turkey. So the Ottomans became noted warriors quickly and started to take by force or convert, through sometimes willingness or threat of force, people nearby tribes and peoples to their cause and to their religion, Islam. So they conquered lands in Asia Minor, which is where Turkey is, and sort of continued out from there. But Turkey was always the core of the Ottoman Empire. They captured the Byzantine, or Osman captured the Byzantine city of Bursa, which they made the Ottoman capital. So by the time he died, this empire was on the map. I mean, figuratively, they were already literally on the map, but larger things were to come. The Janissaries, an Ottoman expansion. As you can see in both pictures here, left and right, we're talking about soldiers. When Osman first started to conquer nearby tribes and spread his influence across Asia Minor or Turkey, this group of soldiers known as the Janissaries were not around yet, but they became the core and the key to Ottoman success, Ottoman military, political, religious expansion. Uh, Back to Bentley again. A formidable military machine drove Ottoman expansion. After expanding into the Balkans, just southeastern Europe, where Serbia is, the Ottomans created a supremely important force composed of slave troops. Yes, slave troops. You heard that this is a somewhat unique situation. We haven't seen this anywhere in our class yet. He goes on, the Ottomans required the Christian population of the Balkans to contribute young boys to become slaves of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The boys received special training, learned Turkish, and converted to Islam. They had no choice. According to ability, they entered either the Ottoman civilian administration, or civil service, bureaucracy, or the military. Those who became soldiers were known as Janissaries. They quickly gained, the Janissaries, a reputation for esprit de corps, loyalty to the Sultan, and readiness to employ new military technology. The Ottomans outfitted their forces with gunpowder weapons and used them very effectively in battles and sieges. Esprit de corps means kind of a sort of spirit of camaraderie, sort of amongst themselves. So it's a military unit or army fighting with a great deal of spirit, a great deal of élan, as the French call it. In the book I've already quoted once, Osman's Dream, about the entirety of the Ottoman Empire, she says, in theory, these core military units were the servants of the Sultan, but in reality, he was the prisoner of their whims. This is at least over time, once the Janissaries become the key element in the Ottoman military. And without their support, he, the Sultan, could not exercise his sovereignty or power. Securing the allegiance of their troops was as essential for Ottoman sultans as it was for the crowned heads of Europe. As Ottoman history amply demonstrated, deposition or regicide was the fate of the monarch who forfeited his loyalty. Deposition means some sultans were deposed, taken out of office, and some were killed. Regicide means, the killing of a king. So the Janissaries were a potent weapon in the military arsenal of the Ottoman Empire, and the key to their success overall. And the sultans knew it. So over time, the Janissaries developed a great deal of power and knew how to leverage that power, at least the leaders, officers, how to leverage that power in their favor. And this is how, in a way, they kind of almost turned the tables on the sultans, because they were so needed, in demand, that they could kind of call many of their own shots. Mehmet II, the Conqueror, really was around during the key moment in all of Ottoman history, even though, again, it's a long-lasting empire. Same book I just quoted before. In theory, these I already used that. Sorry, wrong slide. I don't know what happened to the right quote. But I have another one, fortunately. That's funny. Mehmet presented himself not just as a warrior sultan, but also as a true emperor, ruler of the two lands, Europe and Asia, and the two seas, the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. He laid the foundations for a tightly centralized, absolute monarchy, and his army faced no serious rival. He completed the conquest of Serbia, moved into southern Greece and Albania, and captured Genovese ports in the Crimea, initiated a naval war with Venice, and reportedly hoped to cross the Strait of Otranto, march on Rome, and capture the Pope himself. So apparently this guy was pretty ambitious. Our textbook tells us, though it doesn't say so here, that he actually did launch an invasion of Italy, but didn't live long enough to see it all the way to its end. And his successors decided to cut it off and not even continue the effort. So he actually was apparently in the process of trying to make good on his claim that he's going to take down the Pope. His biggest claim to fame, of course, is this, the siege attack on Constantinople, which brought about its fall to the Ottomans in 1453. So who did the Ottomans take it from? They took it from the Byzantine Empire, which was the Eastern Roman Empire. The Roman Empire in the West fell towards at the end of the ancient period, but its eastern half lived on for hundreds of years until this very date right here. The Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman Empire, had been in decline for a number of centuries, for sure. They had at one time been a major force in the Mediterranean world, with their capital at Constantinople, named after the Roman emperor who had it built, Constantine. And this was for a long time an impregnable city. Had huge, thick walls around it, and seemingly impossible to breach or get over those walls. It had been done once before this, over hundreds of years. But with the Byzantine Empire weakening, and if you look at where Constantinople is, Istanbul today, right, it's sort of right, it's the dividing line, really, in a sense, between Europe and Western Asia, and Europe and Turkey. They're right across the strait. A small little strait of water separates southeastern Europe or the Balkans from Turkey, which is really Western Asia. So Constantinople was a gigantic prize, and the timing was such, again, that the Byzantine Empire was in decline and the Ottoman Empire was on the rise. Hence, you get this showdown with the victors being the Ottomans. So, as Osman's dream tells us, the Ottomans had ample strategic reason for coveting Constantinople, the seat of the Eastern Roman Empire, since the 4th century. Now, Byzantine control of the Bosporus, sort of the straits we just mentioned, had on several occasions caused serious logistic problems for sultans. Moreover, the costs of conquest and administration of the territories coming under Ottoman rule were mounting, and control of the profits from taxation of the rich trade between the Black Sea Basin and the Mediterranean and Europe would go far towards paying for the Ottoman future. So, taking down the Byzantine Empire, controlling Constantinople, that's former capital of that empire, brought a whole lot of economic advantage to the Ottomans. Bernard Lewis, a well-known historian, expert on the Middle East, in one of his many books, says, with the conquest of Constantinople, for so many centuries, the coveted goal of Muslim arms, meaning armies or weapons, the last piece had fallen into place. Sultan Mehmet II, henceforth known as Faith, or the Conqueror, had sealed the union of the two continents, Asia and Africa, that formed his inheritance, and of the two traditions, Islam and the frontier, that had molded them. The principality of the frontier fighters had become an empire, its chief and emperor. This victory established the Ottoman Sultanate as the spearhead of Islam pointing to the West, and brought it immense prestige with the Islamic world. So the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans is one of the key events in world history, not just right, the history of the Middle East. I mean, partly why we're studying it, but I mean, this is a major event. Everyone was paying attention to this. Everyone in the Muslim world and everyone in the Christian world, to be sure. The Europeans would continue to be fearful of this empire. Keep in mind that, as I mentioned, with regard to the military forces of the Ottomans, specifically the Janissaries, they were maybe the most effective user of gunpowder weapons at this time worldwide. They didn't invent them, but for a time before the Europeans kind of took the lead, the Ottomans were probably number one in effective use of cannons and firearms. And I said the walls of Constantinople were thick and tall, but they were no match for artillery and cannon. And that was really what made the difference here, and allowed the Ottomans inside the walls of the city, and they wreaked havoc and bloodshed big time once they got inside. But this was forever after, or at least after this, an Ottoman city, no longer a Byzantine or Eastern Roman city. The Eastern Roman Empire was done after this because of this. Suleiman the Magnificent, one of the great leaders. He was legendary in his own day and legendary ever since. He expanded the Ottoman Empire even further. He only reigned for about 8 or so years. As you can see there, the little R means reigned. Sometimes I have their lifespan on here. Sometimes I have leaders, time in power. In 1534, conquered Baghdad and added to the Tigris. I'm sorry, that must be 1540. He ruled for longer than I realized. In 1534, he conquered Baghdad and added the Tigris and Euphrates valleys to the Ottoman domain. In Europe, he captured Belgrade in 1521. So that is going back earlier, because the first part is talking about his additions to the empire through conquest to the east, and the second part there is talking about to the west, at least west of Turkey. Belgrade is one of the big cities in Eastern Europe. Yugoslavia, formerly in 1521. Serbia. He defeated and killed the king of Hungary at Mohacs in 1526, and laid siege to Vienna in 1529. The latter event terrified Europeans, not just in Vienna. Vienna's the capital of Austria, and the capital of the Austro-Hungarian, or I'm sorry, the Austrian Habsburg Empire. The Habsburgs being maybe the most famous and powerful family in all of Europe. And for the Ottomans, they didn't take Vienna. They came close to it. But for them to lay siege to the city at all, and even for a certain amount of time, this had a ripple effect of shock and fear all the way through Europe, because they had reason to fear, from this and going forward, that it might be only a matter of time before the Muslim world, under the leadership of the Ottomans, are going to come to our door, our backyard, and maybe take Vienna and beyond. So this was scary indeed for Europeans. The Ottomans are certainly making their presence in the world known. Bentley says, under Suleiman, the Ottomans also became a major naval power. In addition to their own Aegean and Black Sea fleets, the Ottomans inherited the navy of the Mamluk rulers of Egypt when they conquered them. Thus, Suleiman was able to challenge Christian vessels throughout the Mediterranean, as well as Portuguese fleets in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. So that's quite a long way away from sort of their capital at Constantinople, all the way across the Mediterranean, down through the Red Sea, and sort of around to where the Portuguese, as we've already talked about, were doing their thing, trying to force their way into the Indian Ocean trade. Suleiman even tangled with them that far away, to some degree successful. Seized the islands of Rhodes in the Mediterranean, besieged Malta in that same ocean or sea, took control of Yemen and Aden, attacked Portugal as far away as Dieu in India. So incredible sort of span of territory, both on sea and land, that Suleiman the Magnificent, was either successfully taking or at least, you know, attacking. Again, the Siege of Vienna may be the most famous of these to the Europeans for sure, because of how much it forced the European continent to take notice of the Ottomans from this point forward. The Battle of Mohacs, just previously mentioned, the Ottomans, according to Bernard Lewis, here shattered the army of the Kingdom of Hungary. After the victory, Suleiman's armies advanced across Hungary and in 1529, for the first time, laid siege to Vienna. So Mohacs, in a sense, opened up the possibility after the Hungarian army was defeated. It was kind of clear sailing, or riding in this case, all the way sort of west to Vienna. We now move to the Safavid Empire, so from green to pink, whatever that color is there, salmon. The Ottomans, Bernard Lewis again telling us, had to face a dangerous enemy, a Muslim rival, the new Safavid dynasty of the Shahs of Iran. They were brought to power by a radical Shiite movement, and for the first time in centuries created a united and powerful state embracing the whole area between the Mediterranean lands and the approaches to Central Asia and India. The establishment of a new militant power in Iran, inspired by radical Shiite doctrines, was seen in Turkey as both a threat and a challenge, and gave a religious character to this renewal of the age-old rivalry between the rulers of the Anatolian and Iranian plateaus. So the Anatolian plateau, which is basically where Turkey is. If you look in the right, Turkey's a peninsula, the green there, that's sort of going from left to right. And they had been longtime rivals of the peoples of the Iranian area, which is the one in the salmon color. So this rival is renewed now under two new and somewhat new empires. The founder of the Safavid dynasty was Shah Ismail, and this is one heck of a story. This guy came out of nowhere, and again came from Turkey, and yet became the Shah of Iran. So we don't have a ton of details on his early life, and not that much, but this guy must have had an enormous amount of drive, an enormous amount of smarts, probably an enormous amount of ruthlessness, and most likely some real charisma, sort of a magnetic personality to pull this off. This is just remarkable. So Bentley tells us in 1499, a 12-year-old boy left the swamps of Gilan near the Caspian Sea, so inland in Turkey, where he had hidden from the enemies of his family for 5 years to seek his revenge. So he came out of hiding to seek his revenge after 5 years. 2 years later, he entered Tabriz, the Persian capital, at the head of an army and laid claim to the ancient Persian imperial title of Shah. Talk about boldness, right? This guy's got a great deal of confidence in himself. I almost said something else. I won't. Over the next decade, he seized control of the Iranian plateau and launched expeditions into the Caucasus, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Central Asia. Shah Ismail's curious blend of Shiism, a branch of Islam, and Turkish militancy, basically meaning sort of the Turkish ability, military prowess, gave his regime a distinctive identity, particularly because he made conversion to Shiite Islam mandatory for the largely Sunni population. So another audacious move on his part. This guy's an outsider, coming in and shaking everything up in Iran, even to the point of saying, hey, I know you people here in Iran practice Sunni Islam. Not any longer. You're going to be Shiites. And the Sunni Shiite split, which lasts to this day, is well known for being, a long-term conflict, sometimes a bloody one, because they fought each other off and on for centuries. They haven't always fought. There have been times and in certain places in history where they've coexisted and sort of been peacefully inclined. Sometimes our news makes it sound like they're always at each other's throats, but make no mistake, these two branches, the two main branches of Islam, have been serious enemies at times, and this is one of those periods. Uh, Bentley says further, the Safavids traced their ancestry back to Safi al-Din, leader of a Sufi religious order in northwestern Persia. Sufism, a mystical belief and practice, formed an important Islamic tradition. The goal of a Sufi mystic was to recover the lost intimacy between God and the human soul and to find the truth of divine knowledge and love through a direct personal experience of God. So here we get another example of what Shah Ismail was capable of. It appears, now we can't be certain of this, but it appears he sort of looked back to a Muslim figure, this time a religious figure, not a political figure, that was famous and respected from the past, and pulled him out of a hat and said, "Oh, this guy's my ancestor." So as a way to legitimize his rule, because he came in basically as a kind of just a conqueror and an outsider at that, he felt the need correctly to legitimize himself. Legitimacy means when a leader or a government tries to convince the public, convince their subjects or citizens that they're legitimate rulers, that they didn't just come in and do it by force, and there aren't just a bunch of brutes. That we have real justifications, legitimate reasons for being your government and your leaders. Governments don't always try for legitimacy, but if they're smart, they do. Because even if they take power by force, I mean, sometimes, especially if they take power by force, they're not seen as necessarily legitimate. When you just came in here and sort of knocked everybody around, and now you said you're legitimate rulers. So this guy was smart enough to find somebody from a revered person from the Muslim past, basically from this part of the world, and say, yeah, he's my ancestor. I kind of come from him, which is really to make him, seem or people believe that he was closer to being one of them than they might have otherwise thought. Now, maybe he really was, descended from Sufi al-Din, but I think it's open to question because the audacity fits his normal pattern, and to his sort of sly, ability to know what to do at the right time, audaciously shows through again in other places. Twelver Shiism is the more specific brand of Shiite Islam that was practiced here, which is quite interesting, which, according to Professor Bentley, said that Twelver Shiism holds that there had been 12 infallible imams, or religious leaders, basically meaning the leader of Islam, at least in theory, after Muhammad, beginning with the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, Ali. And by the way, the entire Sunni Shiite split that exists to this day is about that. It's about who were the legitimate, just talked about legitimacy, who was the legitimate successor or successors to Muhammad. The Sunnis and the Shiites disagree and disagreed back then and have ever since about who the legitimate leaders were and are since the death of Muhammad, the person that originated the religion, that their prophet. So they thought that Ali and his son Hussein were actually the real supposed to be leaders, one of whom was assassinated. So this all got really messy and really ugly going way back, and the wound hasn't entirely healed ever since. Most of the Muslim world are Sunnis. So the Sunni branch of Islam is the biggest one, and it's kind of considered I guess, the more standard one, maybe just because it is bigger. The Shia, as they're sometimes called, are minority groups, although they're majorities in certain Islamic countries, like Iran today. The 12th or hidden imam, according to the story, had gone into hiding around 874, so way back when, to escape persecution. I mean, it was already way back when Shah Ismail is around. But the Twelver Shiites believed that the 12th imam was still alive, meaning all the way since 874, and would one day return to take power and spread his true religion. Ismail's father had instructed his Turkish followers to wear a distinctive red hat with 12 pleats in memory of the 12 Shiite imams, and they subsequently became known as redheads. Safavid propaganda also suggested that Ismail was himself the hidden imam, or even an incarnation of Muhammad. So here we go again. This has Shah Ismail's fingerprints written all over it. This guy was bold indeed. One might even say reckless, because this is just flat out blasphemy in Islam. You don't, if you're the ruler of a country, you don't get to say that you're an incarnation of Muhammad. But he got away with it for the time. What he was saying did resemble, it says here, traditional Turkish conceptions of leadership that associated military leaders with divinity. But those were sort of old tribal associations going back to their pre-Islamic religions, not Islam itself. So this guy really pushed the envelope, and what he did and pulled off was astonishing, really, to be honest with you. I don't know that I've ever, I've been studying and teaching world's history for a long time. I don't know if I've ever seen anything quite like this. The degree of difficulty and the odds of pulling this off it's just incredible. The redhead soldiers believed that Ismail would make them invincible in battle because they believed he was, again, possibly incarnated from Muhammad, or it was the 12th hidden imam himself, and they became fanatically loyal to the Safavid cause overall. So Ismail and his successors had fanatically devoted troops. That can help if you're trying to conquer the world or chunks of it. The Battle of Chaldiran, 1514. This is, I think, the single most famous battle between any of these three empires that we're looking at here. I'll read first and then comment. Bernard Lewis, again, writes that the Ottoman and Safavid empires engaged in a war that ended with the decisive but not conclusive Ottoman victory on the plain of Chaldiran near the border between the two empires. The Ottoman janissaries and artillery inflicted a crushing defeat on Iranian forces, and the Sultan occupied the Iranian capital, Tabriz. Sultan Selim, who was the Sultan at the time, did not pursue his victory eastwards, however, but withdrew back to Turkey, leaving the Shah defeated and weakened, but still ruler of a Shiite state in Iran. A long, bitter struggle between the two empires followed or ensued, in which the bloody repression of the Shiites in Turkey and of the Sunnis in Iran watered their mutual hate and fear with the blood of martyrs. Meaning, in both kingdoms, there were people on sort of the other religious side. So in the Shiite kingdom of Iran, there were Sunnis living there too, and in the Sunni Ottoman Empire, there were Shiites living there. And when the two empires went to war with each other, guess who got punished? Right? In both empires, the people that were of the wrong religion, meaning the one that was not the same as the king or the Shah, or the Sultan. Shah Abbas the Great, a descendant, a follower of Ismail. According to Professor Lewis, the reign of Shah Abbas was in many ways the peak of the Safavid period. Shah Ismail, I think, was the most remarkable leader, maybe of all that we're going to see in this whole unit. Not necessarily the nicest leader, maybe the craziest, but it's an incredible story coming out of nowhere. But this time period with Abbas, who's also a skilled leader, is really the high point of the power of the Safavid Empire. His first major task, Shah Abbas's that is, was to build a new infantry and artillery after the Ottoman model. So nothing succeeds like success. So everyone's looking at the Ottomans now, saying, "Hey, what are they doing? How are they winning all the time?" Okay, let's do some of that. In this, he was much helped by two English brothers, Anthony and Robert Shirley, who went to Iran in 1598 with 26 followers. And so he brought in Europeans who knew gunpowder warfare better, and so he was trying to get his armies up to speed with the Ottoman armies. This, of course, is decades after Chaldiran, so they already had a painful, bitter memory of what such weapons could do to you if the other side had them and you didn't. Abbas had to halt the Uzbeks of Central Asia, who had invaded and conquered a number of towns in the eastern provinces of Iran. To free himself for this purpose, he made peace with the Ottomans. After a successful campaign against the Uzbeks, however, he turned his attention again to the west. In 1603, his armies recaptured Tabriz, and went on to win further victories and capture new territory, including much of Iraq, which had previously been lost to the Ottomans. So this is the Abbasid Empire, sort of going back, sort of the other way. And after losing at Chaldiran, a number of generations later, the tide is on the other side now. Another major event of this guy's reign was the appearance in 1616 of the English East India Company. Another wrinkle that we'll get into later on. I said Abbasid dynasty. That's a much older Islamic dynasty. It's the Safavid dynasty. We have enough names already as it is, so I'm just hopelessly confusing you. I was thinking it's Abbas, so Abbasid, but this is the Safavid dynasty. Now we get to the third and final, and aren't we all thankful that it's the final one? I know I am. The Mughal Empire, which was most of India, as you can see from the map there on the right. According to Stanley Wolpert, in his a good book, A New History of India, a fairly standard history, been around for a while. He says, at its height, the empire was divided into 12 provinces and subdivided into districts, which were usually broken down into sub-districts. Each province was ruled by a governor, whose lavish court was a miniature reflection of the great Mughals. Municipalities were separately administered by a city governor, who supervised the various bureaucratic boards. Cities supported their own police force, while the countryside was secured by district military commanders, who assisted the district revenue collectors in gathering the emperor's share at each harvest. So why do I read all of those details to you? To make the point that this empire, like the other two we've looked at, really sort of brought in effective administration and bureaucracy. Right? And people don't always like bureaucracy because it leans on them, like taxes and rules and regulations, and limits what you can do and what you want to do. But it's actually essential for these political units to stay alive and become powerful, fend off enemies, build their economic strength, the military strength, etc. In the modern world today, the 21st century, we can argue about how much administration we should have, and that argument does get made all the time in democratic countries like ours. Politicians go back and forth about whether the administration is too big or too small, or effective, not effective. But in the time period we're talking about, there's no doubt that to get to where we are today, at least the good things about today in the modern world, there had to be empires like these. And we've seen other countries, empires, kingdoms doing the same thing. France, for instance, in Louis XIV, they have to organize their governance more effectively. So that's what we're seeing happening in these three empires, like we've seen it elsewhere. Babur goes to India. Get it? I didn't make that up. I forget one of the authors I've been looking at here had this as the head of a chapter, or subheading of a chapter. The reign of Babur the Tiger, as he's sometimes called. This was a Turk, another outsider, who came to another place, this time India, to carve out sort of a name and an empire of his own. He claimed descent from Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, the great Mongol conquerors. So this is somewhat like Shah Ismail, because who knew whether he was descended from them? Apparently, he got people to believe that he was, otherwise he probably wouldn't be learning this right now, whether he was or not. Same with Shah Ismail in Iran. He's claimed he came from Sufi al-Din. He may not have, but he must have convinced people that he did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. This guy was an adventurer and mercenary, which means soldier of fortune, who showed up in India. And he appears to have been just someone who wanted to be known as a conqueror. Tamerlane had that sort of kind of attitude as well. His father had been a regional prince in Turkey, so kind of a regional chieftain, and he wanted to carve out a huge, the son, Babur, wanted to carve out a huge empire. He did develop and trained a large army and had firearms and artillery. So he also was sort of looking at the Ottomans and realizing, okay, this is the direction we have to go. Gunpowder weapons, which sounds to us like duh today, but nonetheless, gunpowder weapons were still in their fairly early stages. So with this type of weaponry and a large army, he invaded India, actually a few times in a few years, but captured Delhi by 1526. He died in 1530, leaving a fairly decentralized, somewhat centralized empire from Kabul to the western borders of the Punjab. I say fairly decentralized. I should say fairly centralized. It's a little bit of both, because the previous slide, that quote shows signs of centralization of power. Yes, it's sort of at various levels, sort of national, regional, local, but that's still some degree of centralized power. So that slide should probably have said, it's somewhat centralized, fairly centralized. Bentley tells us that he cared little for the land he had conquered. Not surprisingly, he wasn't from there, and he seems to have just wanted to conquer any territory that he could to turn himself into a big shot. Many in his entourage wanted to take their spoils of war and leave the hot and humid Indian climate. Just wanted to grab the loot and go home. He probably hoped to use the enormous wealth of India to build a vast Central Asian empire like that of Tamerlane, meaning like somewhere else. An elusive dream that his successors would nonetheless continue to cherish. So this beginning to an empire is a strange one, because this guy seems to have created a successful empire that he didn't even really want. It's like, I got this empire. I kind of want another one now. I'll use this one to help myself get another one, which he wasn't able to do. But his successors kind of had that dream. So the Mughal Empire, started by a guy from Turkey who didn't seem to give a damned about India, but conquered it and formed an empire anyway. Go figure. Throwing the same guy out of a window twice. The reign of Akbar. This is a great story as well. I guess I shouldn't be laughing about it, but it's so long ago. I don't think we're going to be get all emotional about it here, though he probably wasn't the nicest guy in the world. But we'll see. He was a complex individual. Akbar was definitely the real architect of the Mughal Empire. As it says, even though he wasn't the founder of the empire, this guy was more into it than the founder, and he had ability. However, to take power first in his region, he had to throw an existing leader out a window, and actually ran downstairs. This is true. Dragged him back up the stairs. He might have had help, I don't know, and threw him out the window again to make sure that he was dead. I think he was dead, probably even the first time, but hey, you never can be too careful. So he was apparently pretty tough, as well as being gifted, charismatic, smart, etc. Maybe not a guy you really want to mess with. But this is a good lesson for all of you. You thought you'd never learn anything practical in this class. If you ever see somebody that you know, or just happen to see somebody, period, throw somebody out a window, and then run downstairs, drag them back, the person back up to where they came from, and throw them out the window a second time, you might want to call the cops or stay away from that person, not mess with them, because you're probably dealing with a formidable person there. That's a joke, by the way. So military campaigns by Akbar solidified Mughal power in Gujarat, Bengal, big chunk of northeastern India. He began to acquire the Hindu kingdom of Vijayanagar, which laid the foundations for expansion eventually into southern India as well. So it's under Akbar that the Mughal Empire really kind of makes a name for itself. But though he seems to have been homicidal on one side of him, our text says that he was also a thoughtful, reflective man, and he probably was deeply interested in religion and philosophy. He pursued a policy of religious toleration that he hoped would reduce tensions between Hindu and Muslim communities in India. This has been a long time issue in India, which still exists to this day, to some degree. Conflict between religious groups, again, this time not within Islam, but between Muslims and Hindus, both of whom have sort of large numbers in India. The Hindu population is larger, but the Muslim is still large. That's Akbar, going back now to the 16th, 17th centuries, was extremely bright. He appears to have been illiterate, but had books read to him. If you're an emperor, you don't have to learn how to read. You just have people read to you. Right? Have them read all day long if you want to. So he apparently loved. It's like sort of getting in the audio book. He got the audio book by just forcing somebody to come in and read to him all day long. Instead of imposing Islam on his subjects, he encouraged the elaboration of a syncretic religion called the Divine Faith that focused attention on the emperor as a ruler common to all religious, ethnic, and social groups of India. So he was certainly practical, pragmatic. Right? We've learned about syncretic religion before. You're trying to kind of blend religions together to make them more appealing to people, at least at first. And so he's it's a practical way to try to unify people around and under religious ideas. and religious practices. So he was doing that, himself.